Every now and then, especially on Twitter, you get someone with a new hot take about something like digital blackface and using black gifs, or cultural appropriation and white people wearing dreads or wearing traditional Chinese dresses, or using AAVE slang, or poggers being racist. Usually these claims are dismissed as being bait. To most, I don't have to explain how this isn't genuinely offensive, because most of you intuitively recognize these claims are somehow completely laughable. But why are we seeing the rise of so many bad woke takes, and what makes them so absurd? Where is the line between when we listen to someone's claim of offense or dismiss it? What exactly makes someone a Wokescold? Is this term really useful, or is that itself another offensive term? I think it has to do with the kind of offense we perceive to be manufactured. Manufactured offense. What is it? This phrase has been coined before. Unfortunately, the only page that my Google search brings up with this term doesn't exist anymore, so I'm starting from the bottom. Manufactured offense, as I define it, is offense based not on actual experience or hurt or pain felt, but rather offense that has been learned or adopted through ideology, hypotheticals, loose associations, and fallacious assumptions. In other words, the offense is derived from a cloudy realm of vague implications and potentiality. In the age of wokeness, there is a heightened attention and awareness of societal harm being done toward marginalized groups. Its aim is harm reduction through the criticism and eventual elimination of social norms deemed racist, sexist, ableist, or in some form problematic. Ah yes, problematic. Describing something not quite evil, just, presenting various problems. That thing that seems kinda yikes. Something that could, potentially, send the wrong message or normalize a bad idea or kind of imply a certain truth or romanticize and or fetishize a bad thing. Oh boy, so many buzzwords, so little time. But I'm not just going off on a random tangent. There is something I believe ties all these sentiments together and how they result in manufactured offense. That is, a string of unsubstantiated claims that conclude that something results in harm. The claims that these things are offensive and must stop are made mostly through overgeneralizations. Often these generalizations are used in a slippery slope argument to conclude that something results in literal abuse. A vintage example: video games cause violence. Violence in video games desensitizes gamers to violence. Individuals that are desensitized to violence are more likely to enact or tolerate real violence. By now we know through numerous studies that there is little evidence that violent video games cause players to want to commit acts of violence or tolerate acts of violence in real life. Of course, we must concede that there is a possibility at least one instance where these games had some psychological role in a person who decided to commit a mass shooting. However, the reality of a few gamers enacting violence is not enough to justify banning video games across the board among the majority of the population, or prove that they push the average person even a little to want to act violently. Those who manufacture offense use a similar set of reasoning to explain why something is wrong without evidence of real-world harm. The problem with modern manufactured offense, unlike violence in video games, is that much of it deals with issues where little to no actual studies have been conducted that can either affirm or deny them. For instance, one of my personal favorites: straight women writing gay romance fiction fetishizes gay men. Fetishizing gay men in fiction causes women to view them as sexual objects in real life. Women who view gay men as sexual objects are likely to treat gay men badly. These statements may be plausible when it comes to certain women, and there are many videos on YouTube lamenting the cringe offenses fangirls have committed. But like with video games and violence, it doesn't represent the entire picture with all of the writers and fans involved. Assumptions are made about the psychological effect of fiction, and a truth that applies to a small subset of the population is used to apply to the totality of writers and fans across the board. There is still a lot of debate surrounding this example, and it's not as easily laughed away. But I think it shows that the danger of manufactured offense is that it can take neutral and innocent actions that many people enjoy and falsely denote them as having a wide-ranging harmful impact based on so little information. The waters of what is considered rightly offensive is somewhat murky, and there's the question of whether all offense is manufactured to some extent. But before we get into that, I want to look at a recent controversial example of a questionable joke. Olly Thorn of PhilosophyTube made what I consider a really lame dad joke. He said, quote, "That's a surprise. Best of luck to the president in her transition," in response to an article headline mentioning Trump's transition. Ha ha, very funny. The tweet didn't get ratioed. It's at about 17,000 likes. However, many people took issue with it, although it's clear in the comment section that a lot of trans people did not think the joke was harmful. Vosh already made a video about this tweet with a lot of interesting points. But let's really assess why people were upset. This isn't the easiest task, because the explanations were so varied and generalized, and utilizing leaps of logic that I can hardly comprehend. One of the top comments was, "This is a joke only found funny by transphobic people. What does that say about the joke?" So, are we assuming that most of those 17,000 likes to this tweet were transphobes? Where is this person getting this information? And transphobes liking a joke doesn't make that joke transphobic. Some things are universally funny to trans people and transphobes alike. Another often made complaint, which I'm going to summarize, goes something like, "Trans people are the butt of this joke. They are the punchline. That insinuates that they are a joke and can be made fun of." But there are a lot of jokes where trans is the punchline. Here is a very similar joke featured on this video with two trans people.
When I was in Vancouver, we saw a road called the Trans-Canada Expressway, and I said, "What? Was it assigned USA at birth?"
I think I've just decided that trans people aren't funny.
Yet another complaint made the assertion that this joke indulges in the conservative belief that being trans is shameful and unnatural. We must do better. You must do better. Now, I can't for the life of me connect the dots here enough to really evaluate this claim. Maybe you can help me in the comments. Maybe pulling up an image of Trump in the same space you say a trans joke associates trans identity with something bad, in the same way advertisers are afraid to promote their brand alongside certain content out of fear of people making a subconscious association. I mean, the brain naturally draws connections between things. This leads me to believe that it's not the joke itself or trans being the punchline that's the problem. It's the involvement of Trump, a transphobic figure. To summarize what I find to be the most substantial claim, you are calling a transphobe trans. That's like calling a homophobe gay. It uses transness and gayness as a punishment, and insinuates that all phobes are closeted. In my last video, I stated that in any instance where neutrality and innocence can be applied, it should be. I repeat it because I think it's an important point. One could try to read Olly's mind and see that he thought the joke was funny because he's calling a transphobe trans. Or one could assume he was just utilizing a pun that probably a lot of people thought of when they first saw that original headline. Olly wasn't necessarily calling Trump trans because he is transphobic. The fact that Trump is considered a transphobic figure doesn't have any bearing on the pun itself. The point is that this intention is not inherent in the joke as it was posted. It must be assumed. People may very well be projecting their own interpretations against a blank canvas based on their own insecurities. So, is all offense manufactured? In a sense, offense is hurt felt by actions that don't directly cause any physical harm. However, I would argue that there is more of a real degrading intention behind actions we deem as rightfully offensive. Take actual blackface, historically used to make fun of black people as a group. I don't know how you can argue that this action, both in its intention and execution, does not work to literally paint black people as funny looking. There is the intention to degrade people inherent in the action. It's not an accident. You don't have to squint to see it. But even with blackface, context and intention matters. There are modern examples that most people still find funny, because the intent to degrade is not present, and is in fact used to make a mockery of racism and blackface itself rather than perpetuate the harmful mindset of that tradition. But I want to raise the general question of, why would people get offended by something if there wasn't something wrong with it? What causes this kind of offense? I think there are several factors. Note, though, that I don't have any proof for what I'm about to consider. However, these are my impressions based on what I've observed throughout the years. In the age of wokeness, the lens through which we view the world has been altered. In a more innocent way, there is a new kind of incentive to point out problems related to oppression and injustice. It's the high of making a difference and changing the world and being on the right side of history. A lot of people are sensitive, and that sensitivity is heightened and even celebrated. Combine this with a perfectionist disposition, and this creates a narrow standard of moral purity, a standard so sharp and pure that it punishes people not only for present actions, but actions long since past. Everything past and present is now under a moral microscope, spotting things so small that they require book-length essays to get people to see the problem. Now onto a more insidious possibility, that this moral purity becomes a means by which people can exert power and control over others, over society as a whole. The moral cleansing of society has had its appeal since the dawn of time, manifesting itself primarily in religious structures. People were not demonized on a whim, but based on the very perception that they posed a danger to society. In a democratized age, it presents itself as a means for those who feel disempowered and insignificant to be the authority on something for once. Offense is not felt. It is sought out at every slight opportunity, and ends up demonizing innocent actions and actors. When someone assigns harm or a threat towards something that is not dangerous, this should be taken very seriously. Thus, we are faced with the Wokescold, taking it upon themselves to make sure everyone else falls in line. There is a very good reason they are formally called social justice warriors. They have a fighting and self-righteous disposition. Having a perfectionist mindset, hardly anything is ever good enough. Actual attempts to do something good for the world, like LGBT or neurodivergent representation in media, are picked apart and all flaws and mistakes blown up into huge controversies and the entire thing condemned and the creators told to do better. I truly believe that all these tendencies are rooted in the trauma that creates perfectionist, never good enough mindsets. Not just problem solving, but insatiable problem seeking. The evils of perfectionism are becoming a theme in my videos, and I cannot stress them enough. Though perhaps this is a tangent for another video. But anyway, I think I've said enough. As always, if you disagree with what I've said, you can chew me out in the comments. I'm not a big enough creator to the point where I don't read every single comment. Because it's sad that I do. That's all, folks. Bye. Bonkers is racist.